Welcome back. I'm going to begin today's session as part of a continuation from yesterday's conversation, where I started a process of directly speaking to men with regards to the complications that some face with selecting or choosing people to partner with, and unfortunately having a poor selection choice. Women particularly who are overweight, fat, obese, and perhaps not necessarily careful about their physical and physical self-image. In any case, let me address what I think would be a rather direct conversation by starting with defining, and this is my perspective, but defining what I consider to be either overweight, fat, carrying excess and unnecessary weight. You might say having too much junk in the trunk, or even obese. The BMI provides what I think is a standard way of trying to ascertain where you fall within the weight scale. All weights cannot be dealt with in isolation. It always has to be adjusted to your height. So we always look at your weight to height adjusted ratio. In any case, some time ago, I came up with what I consider to be a very, very simple way to determine whether you are in good form or whether you were overweight. To keep matters very simple, the formula is as follows. For women, your weight and your ideal weight in kilograms should simply be your current height in feet. So for example, if you're 5'4", then you should weigh 54 kilograms. Now this is the guide. That is your ideal weight. I provided in the prior sessions an adjustment that can be applied for those who are taller, and also an adjustment for those who are shorter. Now let me address that adjustment because I think it could be useful. Assuming you're 5'7", you are taller than the average. And so I make a separation between those who are taller than the average and those who are shorter than the average. If you're 5'5" and above, in this case, let me be more specific. If you're 5'6" and above, then you apply an additional 3 kilograms, which is an adjustment. That accounts for the fact that you can carry more weight based on your adjusted height, and it wouldn't look, generally shouldn't look bad on you. The shorter you are, the more it is within your interest to weigh less. So if you're below 5'5", in this case 5'4" and below, your ideal weight should simply be your height, and you should deduct 3 kilograms, and that is an adjustment factor that I recommend. In any case, the kit matter is very simple. Just look at your height. Now, there are people who have slightly larger breasts, and therefore, based on your cup size, some adjustments can be made. The smaller you are, or the shorter you are, and if you have larger bosoms, and if you have larger breasts, it becomes even more important to weigh less. In any case, I think the formula kept simple is the best way to understand where you are in relation to your ideal weight. So for men, here is a very simple way of understanding whether the woman is overweight. If she weighs 10 kilograms above her ideal weight, then unfortunately she's carrying excess fat. If she weighs 20 kilograms more than her ideal weight, then she is fat. And the higher that number, the more you move from just being fat to being overweight to being obese. Very simple. Now, there is something else that perhaps should be kept at the back of your mind. If she has an active health exercise regime, in this case, she trains, say, 3 to 4 times every week, but still weighs 10 kilograms above her ideal weight, then she's certainly overweight or fat, or just carrying too much junk in her trunk. Now, the reason I mention this is because most men, we make a mistake of not really understanding how to set our standards and also how to have non-negotiating standards in certain areas. Now, some of these rules will vary as I go through them, because they in many ways depend on the man himself, where you are in your life, your age, your disposition, and your preferences. I generally separate men into 3 groups: 18 and below, 18 to 35, and then 35 and above. For 35 and above, I consider those who are within a reasonable degree of comfort to consider serious relationships. For those who are 18 to 35, I think that is your prime years, and therefore I suggest you avoid serious relationships and you focus on yourself. And what that means is if you are 18 to 35, you're in what I would call the dating marketplace, whereas if you're 35 and above, you could still be in the dating marketplace, or you might be transitioning or have a desire to transition into the marriage or the relationship marketplace. And therefore, the rules you apply in relation to what I call fat women would be different. Now, let's begin with the following. As a man, it's very important that you develop what I call as a qualification process for your associations. Many years ago, one of my mentors and inspirations brought to my attention something that I thought was perhaps one of the most important decisions that I had ever come across. He indicated that not every single person qualifies to be in your inner circle. There are those who can be in your outer circle, and there are few who should be allowed into your inner circle. And your inner circle is where you have people you share your secrets with, your ideas, your aspirations, your vision, and intimacy. Therefore, those who you put in the inner circle have to have qualified to be in that position. In many ways, the core components of a qualification process are usually character traits. There is an element of having, and when I'm referring to this, I'm talking about men, there's an element of having dreams and visions in your imagination. People who dream big, people who want a much better future, people who are not content with remaining mediocre. But basically, you're looking for people with good character traits and those who have an imagination, those with a forgiving spirit. These are all attributes and attitudes that such people should have. With regards to intimacy and selecting people we spend time with, because it's a very physical endeavor, at least initially, before we develop into the mental and the emotional and finally maybe the spiritual aspect. It begins in the physical, and therefore the whole qualification process still applies. You should have some taste, you should have some discriminating taste in who you allow to be physically intimate with. Now, this does not mean you should be selecting people based on skin color or based on what I would call incidental attributes for which they have no claim to that value or that attribute. In this case, I'm referring to qualifying people based on their choices they make. So for example, if I met a man who was a kind man and he had huge dreams in his mind, things he wanted to be, places he wanted to see, places he wanted to go to, experiences he wanted to be part of, and he had a desire to help people in an altruistic manner. I can judge him based on his character and his attitude and his outlook. With regards to intimacy, one of the ways we judge is physical. Men, we are visual. One of the reasons why we are visual is because we have to be aroused. In addition to being aroused, we want to be excited. We want to be inspired. A woman's presence can satisfy all of us thirsts that a man usually has. So she can play the role of a muse, someone who comforts you, who brings serenity into your environment. She can also play the role of someone who inspires you. And beauty is inspiring. Now, beauty can come in various forms. And one way beauty comes is in the recognition of one's intrinsic value and preserving one's body and caring for that body in such a way that when people see you, there is an aura, there is an awe that they have because you have an amazing body. For most people, we get to choose the lifestyle that we have, and therefore qualifying who you associate with intimately starts with appearance, how they dress, how they carry themselves, their etiquettes, their decorum, their mannerisms, and their size. Size is the first thing we see. I get to see you first before I hear you or before I experience you. And to use the analogy that I have shared before regarding why men have an urge for sex, I have contrasted this with a concept that people will relate to. And I say usually, and this is not an original idea of mine, this has come from being a student of someone I consider to be best, Professor L, Professor Tom. And the analogy is urination, that a need for a man, or the desire for a man to ejaculate, is synonymous with his need to urinate. And that when we need to urinate, we seldom choose the best places, because sometimes the necessity comes at the wrong time. Ideally, your preference would be to be in an environment you know, which is home. But if you had to choose, assuming you were outside the home, you would want a 5-star, 6-star, 7-star hotel with urinals that are very beautifully crafted. But if you cannot find that, you would use the urinals in a train station, which is usually filthy most of the time, or you might use perhaps the side corner on a street. So we start from something that is considered to be desirable, and we come all the way down to the bottom of the barrel, which is the least desirable. For most men, if we had to choose, we would prefer an experience that is worthy of remembering. So, when we need to ejaculate, in our innate makeup is to have encounters with the most attractive women, the most beautiful women. And if we cannot afford a 10, we go for a 9. If we can't afford a 9, we go for a 6. We go for a 5, we go for a 4. But there is a bottom gradient that most men usually stop and say, well, I'll just wait it out. I'm desperate, but I do not want to create a memory that makes me recoil later on in the future. And so therefore, when you meet someone, or if you're dating someone who is overweight or fat, thick, carrying excess weight, it's analogous to wanting to urinate in the least desirable place, because what that simply suggests is the person has a low estimation of themselves. They don't consider their body to be a temple, and therefore they've made life choices and decisions that demonstrate their self-discipline, their vision, and perhaps indicate to you that their character in relation to the attributes that you find long-term desirable are not consistent with yours. Now, obviously, I am assuming in this case that you, the man, are of good moral standing, and in this case, you are a good example on the physical front. In any case, the key point here is the importance of qualifying your association. Now, in the dating marketplace, I have explained that the terms and the rules of the game are slightly different to the relationship marketplace. And so let me separate both and give specific rules to men who are in both marketplaces. The overarching rule is to avoid dating thick, fat women, women who are overweight, because there's always a difference in the value system. Someone who doesn't believe in health and well-being or caring for themselves could be in a disalignment with your future goals. And so what you find is, over the long term, two people cannot walk together except they are in agreement. So dating someone who is perhaps overweight and has no intentions of correcting that means you're unequally yoked with the wrong person. Now, but in the dating marketplace, recognizing some of the tenets I have shared before, I have stated, and let me address some of those tenets very, very briefly so you can understand why my preferences for the rules in the dating marketplace are slightly different to my preferences for the marriage marketplace. In the dating marketplace, generally speaking, you are between 18 and 35, or you are above 35 but you have no intentions of getting married or being in a committed relationship or cohabiting with someone or being in a civil partnership. In principle, you've decided to stay in the dating marketplace. Now, you might change your mind once you go above 35, but generally speaking, I address the dating marketplace to people between 18 and 35. In this phase of your life, I recommend that the most important thing you should focus on are your dreams, your future, your purpose, your passion, your professional development. Becoming something and making something of yourself. I suggest you spend about 95% of your time focused on that dream. And then I suggest, in addition to that, that you should not be in a mono relationship, because generally speaking, most people abort their dreams, their vision. Most people are shackled like a tree that cannot be uprooted once they break that focus and once they start dating, because what tends to follow is you start to put other people's needs ahead of yours, and if you're not careful, you start a family too early. I also recommend that you shouldn't have kids before 30 as a minimum, and you shouldn't actually have kids if you can until 35, until you've had the opportunity to fail and try a few things. The core of this set of tenets is the realization that those 18 years you have between 18 and 35 are very, very important. And relationships should not occupy any more than 5% of your time. I calculated what this would amount to in hours, and it came down to roughly 2.5 hours every week, which you can dedicate towards dating. Well, dating equals sex, which is the main reason men date anyway. And therefore, I also recommend that rather than be focused on one specific relationship, it's important to have a number of people you date. You don't have to be sexually active with every single one, but it's important for you to test the waters and date people, go out for meals, go out on walks, go out on sports events, so you can understand the personalities and the types of people you like whilst you're trying to develop yourself. The idea being, you're still too young to know what you want, and sometimes it takes a while for you to come into your preferred tastes. Now, what this means is that if you are in the dating marketplace, and if you have all of your time focused on your future, becoming your best and bringing that potential to reality, the little time you have for sexual encounters and relationships should be afforded, if you can, to those who meet a specific criteria or criterion physically. Now, before the end of today's session, I'm going to give you a way around this, because for most people that I have, as part of my observation, I tend to find that men between 18 and 35, especially men between 18 and 25, tend to date larger women, fatter women, because they say, well, that's all I can afford. The reason being, generally speaking, men, we are only able to attract beautiful women that we can afford. And women, generally speaking, are usually with men that they are able to attract with their beauty and their youth. There are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that is the case. So the younger the man is, he has little resources, little notoriety, little fame, little association in terms of a network, in order to command a really, 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 really beautiful woman, because beauty comes with a cost. And the younger you are, the less likely you are able to fund that cost. What most young boys do in any case is say, well, I can't afford the 9s and the 10s, and I can't afford the 7s and the 8s, but there's a cute girl with a cute face, but she weighs 150 kilograms, or she weighs, 99 kilograms, and she's 5'4". So she's certainly overweight. She's actually obese. But that's all I can afford for now. And what I'd like to encourage you to bear in mind is, I will provide you with a solution to this. However, in the dating marketplace, my recommendation is to avoid such encounters. Now, let me move forward and say, assuming you disagree with this, generally speaking, men who date fat women, women who are overweight, women who are obese, usually fall into a group. They're usually men who are not doing well financially, who have not achieved their purpose or passion, and therefore haven't created any value in the marketplace, and therefore have not received the recognition they deserve. They're usually younger men. They're usually either broke or they have low self-esteem. Now, there is one area that I haven't mentioned, which is men who have a fetish. There are indeed men who, and there's exceptions, who have a fetish for fat women. Now, if you fall into that group, you are certainly an exception to the rule. But there are people in that group nonetheless. The group is so small that I don't focus so much on them. But that might be your thing. In any case, seldom have I met men who have come into their manhood and who have made money and who have wealth and who are doing well and who are single, who intentionally go into the marketplace and pick a fat woman to date. Now, let me spin this around very quickly, because what that means is, for you, the woman, if a man is dating you and you are overweight, fat, thick, it means, technically speaking, you are less attractive. On the ranking scale, and therefore he's settling for you. You're not his first choice. You're not his second choice. You're his last choice. And the risk, and this is partly why I'm doing these series, the risk is that at some point in the future, and let's assume this man is 25, certainly at 25 he has very little experience in the work environment, and therefore he hasn't built up a resume of accomplishments, and therefore his compensation is slightly less than a man who's 35. But I can almost guarantee that once he turns 35, most men come into the awareness, it's as though they come to what I call their road to Damascus moment. The scales fall off their eyes and they realize how much resources that they can command and how much wealth that they have created, and therefore how much they can afford in the dating marketplace. A man who's 35 then recognizes that he can now afford women from 18 all the way up to 35. He can afford the most beautiful, the most youthful, and the most attractive. And what tends to happen is the same man who professed his love for you goes astray like a wild dog. And most women don't understand why. Well, one of the reasons was because he chose you at the wrong time. So, for women, generally speaking, if you are overweight, if you're fat, obese, thick, BBW, whatever acronym that we use these days, the litmus test to know whether you are the one and whether he has chosen you with intention is to test the following. Just go up to him and ask him whether he can be honest with you and whether you are his ideal woman in weight and size. Number 2, just look at his age. If he's below 30, he's failed the litmus test. If he is above 30, he has actually perhaps come into, and this is a qualification, he has maybe come into his own manhood, and therefore he knows what he is doing. The second question would be whether he has low self-esteem. So you can test by looking back at the resume of women that he has dated. Now, if they are all chubby, fat, obese, then it simply means he's a chubby chaser, that he likes big women. Now, there are some, and he might be that exception, and therefore he knows what he is doing. On the other hand, if you notice that the women he has dated in the past are smaller than you, prettier than you, then that is an indication that perhaps he's at a phase in his life where he's transitioning. And that transition process perhaps has made him lose his game. Perhaps he's not in touch with his, what I call animal instincts, doesn't know how to afford what he really desires, and therefore you're ticking over. He's using you to tick over a phase, and at some point in the future, he will be the bearer of bad news, and you will be the recipient of bad news. Now, I digressed, so let me come back to what I was trying to say. In the dating marketplace, I do not recommend young men date women who are fat. I say run, just avoid it like a plague. Now, there are exceptions. I know, because I talk about those who want to simply hook up and those who want side chicks during that phase. I will deal with that in the next few minutes, but before I come to that, let me transition to the alternative marketplace, which is the relationship or the marriage marketplace. A different marketplace, a different set of expectations, and therefore different set of rules. Now, in this marketplace, you find men who obviously are much older, should be more mature, should have achieved a certain level of experience, both professionally, personally, who have actually failed in several areas in life, and therefore have an understanding about what life is, and therefore have come into their manhood. And there is usually an expectation that men from 35 and above should have a different mindset and perspective. In the dating marketplace, women are judged based on one criterion only, which is your sexual marketplace value. And this has to do with how beautiful you are, or how attractive you are. We don't judge too much on age, because we're not thinking about reproducing with you. In the marriage marketplace, we bring in all the other requirements. We judge you based on your sexual marketplace value, we judge you based on your reproductive fertility value, and we judge you based on your non-sexual marketplace value. The first deals with beauty and attractiveness. And this is where weight and height come into play. So the larger you are, the less desirable you are to a man. It's really that simple. Fat women are the bottom of the barrel in relation to attractiveness from a man's perspective. Most men would rather a woman with a butter face, with a great body, than they would an attractive face with a fat body. Now, there is a misconception amongst women that it's easier to transition from a beautiful face and a fat body into a beautiful face and a slim body than it will be a woman who has a butter face and a great body, because you can't change your face. Not so. Men's preferences when it comes to stimulation and arousal do not change. We have to be aroused. So when you wear the lingerie, we're turned off if there is so much flesh, just excess flesh. Now we can put a pillow over that face if it's a butter face, and we can do with that, but the body always keeps the score. Now, in the relationship marketplace, obviously, assuming you, the woman, are dealing with a man in this space, then there are certain levels, certain expectations that are different. Those in the relationship or the marriage marketplace are looking for different standards. They judge based on what they see, the sexual marketplace value. Some of them may want to reproduce, and so they're thinking about what we call your reproductive fertility value. And this is where your age comes into play and your size comes into play. Because the smaller you are, the higher the level of success that you will have as you go through the process of reproducing. The larger you are, the more complications there could be. In the United Kingdom, a significant of the mortality cases amongst pregnant women often come from women who have weight issues. So it's like having comorbidities. It makes things complicated. And so your reproductive fertility value is influenced by your age, because your age determines the quantity of eggs you have and the quality of eggs. But your size determines the success process through pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. Because women, generally speaking, will put on sometimes between 9 and 20 kilograms of weight. On average, between 12 and 15 kilograms of weight after the first child. Some will retain some of that weight, and ideally the rest should be, a transition out of a woman's physique. But in any case, the larger you are before you get pregnant, the higher the likelihood that you'll be much larger. And that is worrying for most men. Now, in the relationship marketplace, we also look into the third criteria, which has to do with your non-sexual marketplace value. This has to do with your attitude, your femininity, whether you have traditional values, whether you believe in the traditional gender roles, your mannerisms, the character you exude, whether you've been trained in etiquettes and female decorum and how a woman should speak. All of these aspects create and provide what I call the two S's in what men want. I talk about 3 S's that men want: sex, serenity, and, as much as we can, servitude. Your non-sexual marketplace value covers servitude and serenity. Now, this is where it works against most women. The larger you are, the more we are less attracted to you sexually, which means you have to overcompensate in serenity, which is peace, and servitude, which is your ability to serve. Unfortunately today, now I remember many, many years ago, when I was still growing up, the larger women were usually the most kind women. Strange. The less attractive women were usually the ones with the best attitude, the most feminine, because they had to compensate. As a matter of fact, today, the larger women are the ones who have the least amount of traditional upbringing, and therefore servitude is not in the question. For some reason, they also have big mouths, and therefore the idea of peace and silence and serenity is out of the question. They're quite contentious. They tend to have very low self-esteem, and therefore there's a combative spirit that most fat women bring. This leaves the final S, which is sex, which means that on all 3 levels in the relationship marketplace, you do yourself no favors in choosing a fat woman. Now, let me address a few things. Fat before the relationship begins, fat that is created or built during the relationship, and fat that occurs post childbirth. Now, I have different views about these 3 areas of life, or 3 moments or periods in a person's, or phases in a person's life. If you are 35 and above, and certainly looking to settle down, therefore looking for a significant other, and let's assume you're ready. This will mean that you're facing a decision of choosing someone who is overweight before the relationship begins. I strongly advise against this. Many men make the mistake of saying, well, she has great personality, she has a great attitude, she's got a servant heart, and she gives me peace, but she's fat and large. My advice is always the same: run. The excuse most men come up with is that, well, she's very, very committed to losing the weight. I disagree with this approach, and I recommend you don't get involved with people who are overweight at the start of a relationship for a number of reasons. Number 1, whenever we lose something, the natural instinct is to find it. So when people say, I've just lost 6 kilograms of weight, it's only a matter of time. Subconsciously, we will go looking for that 6 kilograms, and sometimes we find it and some. That's the first. The second is, I think, more significant in that I do not believe in changing people. I think it's a full-time job changing myself. As a matter of fact, over the years that I've lived, I've become very sympathetic at the idea of changing other people, because I've come to realize how hard it has been in every single instance to change myself. Some of my bad habits, sometimes I struggle, and it's given me some sympathy of recognizing that if you could look at yourself and admit that the difficulty in changing yourself was much farther and much harder than you anticipated, that tends to give you a level of sympathy in relation to, and a level of caution in relation to changing people. I don't believe in evangelistic dating or missionary dating, where you date people so you can convert them. I don't believe in that. I think people should change for themselves. And my view normally is, if he or she doesn't change to get you, they will not change to keep you. Now, like you can understand, most acronyms come with an opposite. The opposite is, if he or she changes to get you, they will resent you if they keep you, especially if that change has come from you. Instinctively, there's something innate in every one of us where we want to change for ourselves. We don't want people telling us what to do, even when it's in our best interest. My view has always been, just leave people the F alone. So, if you are in the relationship marketplace and you are starting a relationship, and the person is overweight, fat, carrying excess baggage, run. That is your future. Now, there's a litmus test, usually just look at a mother. And that should give you an idea, because if the person is overweight at the start of the relationship or before it starts, and her mother is overweight, that is your future. We become our parents. Now, there are exceptions. If the person has a resentment and doesn't admire their mother's state. Now I said something at the start of today's session where I said, if the person is 10% over their ideal weight, that is not acceptable. If they're 20%, they're fat. I also said, if the person trains or exercises 3 to 4 times or more a week and is still 10% or above the ideal weight, that is a red flag. Generally speaking, we go through cycles. The younger we are, the more we grow, the more we exert ourselves. The older we get, the less we exert ourselves. And therefore, someone exercising or living a lifestyle where they exercise 4 times a week, that is the peak you will ever have. You might go up to 5, but that is the peak. As you age, you're more likely to reduce the amount of exercise you do for various reasons, especially if you want to have a family. And therefore, that will drop from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. If they cannot make it work training 4 times a day in maintaining their ideal weight, they will never make it when the exercise program reduces to 0. It'll get worse. So avoid it. Now, number 2, you start dating someone, they start to put on weight, and they're now carrying excess weight that they never had before the relationship began. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise. I have done several sessions where I explain the reasons why. Unfortunately, that is what we get in relationships. I said in some sessions previously that dating is really the art of deceit. We put our best foot forward. And once we get the person to commit, to dedicate themselves to us, we become complacent. We let go, and all of the bad habits we kept under the carpets for months, sometimes for years, they come out. You can only suppress something for too long. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons. You might want to go back and take a look at some of the sessions that I have done. But if you're dating someone and in the course of the relationship, they put on more weight than you anticipated, and certainly you are no longer attracted or stimulated or sexually intrigued. How do you deal with this? Well, I don't believe in ultimatums. I don't believe in telling people what to do. I simply find it more convenient to tell people what I will not tolerate. And I make that very clear at the start of the relationship. I think many men have been co-opted and bullied into not expressing the expectations. I expect in every relationship that I have been in for the person to itemize and articulate and specify their expectations. I can look at those expectations and say sincerely which of those I can meet and the ones I cannot meet. Again, I don't believe in changing people, and therefore it's always been my rule, therefore my standard, to make it very clear at the start of the relationship what I will not tolerate. So in this case, you have to make a decision. You either state what you expect her to look like, because I don't necessarily enjoy seeing people go outside of the boundaries of a commitment or a relationship, because they're not fulfilled within that commitment. So she's 5'4" and she weighs 54 kilograms when you start dating, and 2 years down the line she weighs 61 kilograms. Now at 61 kilograms, you're more than 10% overweight. And let's say she goes up to 70 kilograms. You're about 20% overweight compared to your ideal weight, and also compared to what you wear before you started dating or during the early stages of the process. Let's also compound the example by saying she's had no kids and she's 27, or she's younger than 28. No excuses. I mean, absolutely no excuses. Now, the life expectancy for most people today, women, is 86 in the United Kingdom. Therefore, we are living longer. At 25 or 27, if you are overweight, that is not acceptable, because it means, technically speaking, you've only lived less than a quarter of your life. Not acceptable. Or rather, less than a third of your life. Not as acceptable. I can tolerate people gaining weight from 50. Yeah, 50 is fine, because 50 you've lived roughly almost 2/3 of your life. And we certainly go through health issues, and that is acceptable. Never in history have we had younger people so out of shape and overweight. Never in history. So I would say, you, the man, you have to be very, very clear about your expectations, and you have to provide a time frame. For example, she's 5'4", she's 70 kilograms. She's effectively picked up all of the excess kilograms after the relationship became exclusive. She needs a program. She needs to be told what you expect. Now, I say this simply because I disagree with maintaining the relationship and pursuing other people outside the relationship and committing acts that are not in keeping with the good faith agreement you had with the individual. I prefer you say what you want, say what you're not getting, say what you expect, and let the person decide. Don't give ultimatums. Just state what you expect. And they have a choice. They can either stay and meet those expectations, or they can leave and be free. Now, the final aspect has to do with people who put on weight post-pregnancy. That's a very touchy subject. So I'm going to tread very, very lightly, and I'll say the following. The younger you are, the less tolerance you deserve. If you're 20 or in your 20s, if you're in your 30s, generally speaking, women will put on roughly, in this case, 15 kilograms, but the average baby usually doesn't weigh any more than 10 or 9 kilograms. There should be a timeline to enable you to transition from your post-pregnancy weight down to what you were before you were pregnant. Now, this should not be a shocking statement. Animals do the same thing every time. Human beings are very strange creatures. And for some reason, over the last 30 years, women have come to see motherhood as a martyr experience, something to be martyred for? Well, animals give birth. Animals give birth 6, 7, 8 times, and they return back to their pre-pregnancy weight. It's a choice. It might take some time, but it is a choice. There is nothing that says that once you've given birth, you should weigh 20 kilograms or 30 kilograms more than you were before you had the child. Now, I have seen people who had kids, let's use 30 as an example, and at 35, they weigh 25 kilograms more than they were before their first child. And I have a simple question always. Well, your first child was born 5 years ago. Surely it shouldn't take 5 years to get rid of the excess weight. Now, strategically, there's always a reason for this. And this is where perhaps I'll bring today's session towards a close. Often I talk about the gift of insecurity. One of the ways women stay in shape is if you gift them the gift of insecurity. And this comes in several ways. Before the relationship begins, if you make it very clear what you expect and what you will not tolerate, and if you stick to those words, you don't compromise an inch. Number 2, if you sign a prenuptial agreement, so the woman knows she can't take half of your wealth as she walks out the door. Marriage and committed relationships creates complacency amongst partners. The divorce laws and the family courts are set up to protect the woman, so there is no incentive. Usually when a man says, I'm out the door, I have found, as I have observed in going to the gyms over the many years, the women who in the relationships refused to manage their weight are usually the first who get personal trainers and who return to the gym once they're divorced or once they're about to go through a breakup. So when you exit stage left, she will do what it takes to get her shape back in control, because she understands that in the sexual marketplace, everyone is judged by the same standards. If she wants to be 150 kilograms and compete against a woman of the same height who is 54 kilograms, that is her choice. But that means she will not be selected. Now, I say this to make a point, which is there are no excuses. I think personally that both the man and the woman should always strive, endeavor, work hard to be as sexy as they can for their significant other. Otherwise, there is no need to be in a committed relationship. Just be free. Just go do your thing. If you want to be fat and large, that's fine. You can do that on the other side. Have your home, have your independence, enjoy your space. I don't want to be trapped. Now, I have seen more men who are trapped in relationships who feel like prisoners in their relationships because their significant others has ballooned from what they used to be. And just to keep the peace, they stay and they keep quiet. Now, sadly speaking, I'm also aware of what happens outside the marital bed. I disagree and disapprove of such actions. I think if you're not happy in your relationship for whatever reason, you have a duty of saying I'm not happy and give the person time to fix it. And if they say no, then you move elsewhere. Now, that said, again, I said those who are married and who are wives or partners who are overweight, that is a sensitive issue, especially those who have given the man the gift of the highest honor a woman can give a man, which is to bring forth his seed. In any case, let me transition to the hooking up and the side chick approach. I stated in the earlier session that between 18 and 35, you should avoid being in a committed relationship. Just focus on your dreams, focus on your desires, focus on your future, focus on creating wealth, focus on your passion and your purpose. and stop chasing around women. Now, I know you have a need as a man, and that need has to be met. Now, the younger you are, the less you can afford. And therefore, most young men are in many ways coerced into settling for large women, fat women, thick women, overweight women, who they would not look at if you gave them £1 million, an Aston Martin, say a penthouse suite in Mayfair, and perhaps a lovely 4-bedroom house outside of the M25 where they go to every weekend. If you gave those men maybe an income of, who knows, maybe £170,000 after tax every year, in addition to the £1 million in the bank, most men will choose a different woman. As a matter of fact, most men will run from their existing partners, providing there is no financial liability, with exiting stage left. And the reason is simply because we intrinsically understand what turns us on. So, the younger you are, if you're 18, 20, 22, 23, 24, you've just started the race. You're still in school, dad is still paying your bills, mom is still funding your holiday trips. You don't have to settle. The reason being, the women in your age group who are too preoccupied with the men in the 30s who have wealth, hold on and hold off for too long. And those women, in about 10 years' time, although they are 22 today, in 10 years' time they will be 32. And many of them hold off for too long because they keep believing someone better will come through until they hit 30 and they realize, oh shit, geriatric pregnancy is 35 and above, I need someone. So, if you're 18, 19, 20, the younger you are, you should be dating women who are in their 30s. Now, this is a very, very uncomfortable thing to say, but true nonetheless. Generally speaking, in the dating marketplace, women who are above 30, unmarried, single, we call them fun girls or fuck girls. In other words, you can, like an animal in heat. Those are them who are quickly have an instinctive urgency to transition into the relationship marketplace, have an aura of desperation. Most men in the same age grade, 35, 34, have no interest in them. Therefore, those women are usually single and therefore not in relationships, desperate for intimacy. So, the younger you are, the more you should date older women. Leave the fat women alone and date the attractive 30s and 40s if you want to. Remember, the 38-year-old woman who is single used to be the 10, 15 years ago. She might be a 7 today, but she's still far better than a 22-year-old who is a size 14 or size 18. It's just completely wrong. In any case, the younger you are, just date older women. Now, are there exceptions to everything I've said so far? Yes. But the exception does not disprove the rule. The rule is the rule for a reason. I'm generalizing specifically because I'm making a broad generalization. You might be an exception. Who cares? I don't care. Eat the meat and spit out the bone. Take what works for you. Like a buffet, a lot of the things I talk about or I share, they're not for everyone. You walk into a buffet, you don't have to eat everything on the table. If you're stupid enough to eat the breads and the pasta and the flour-made meals before you go to the lobsters and the steak and the salmon, then there's something wrong with you. So, similarly, based on everything I've shared so far, choose what you think will help you achieve your goals and dreams. If none of them have been helpful, then I guess this wasn't for you. But you don't have to have it all. Now, I hope that's been very useful.